Hopefully you have brought your humans with you, at least in spirit and in your mind. Take a few moments now to think about the people that will work better because of the apps you build. These humans are the ones who are going to benefit from our session today. But it is you that I want to motivate. I want you to build empathy in all you do. Now, I didn't read this book until last year, until after I came up with the title for this presentation. And the more I read, the closer I look, the more I realise this book is about software development. No, actually, building apps is about human relations. Hi, I'm Phil Swann. Welcome to How to Build Apps and Influence People. In this session, I want to motivate you to apply empathy in every project, user story, and every line of code. I'm a ServiceNow MVP, certified master architect, multiple hackathon and award winner, and I've been on the ServiceNow platform for over 10 years, working in the world of tech for 25 years, and today I'm going to talk about building apps and how the success of those apps is dependent on effective human relations. How building better apps relies on empathy. Now, empathy is the power of understanding and imaginatively entering into another person's feelings. With some tips and tricks, tools and techniques you can use to build better apps. With some common situations where you can use them for maximum advantage. And of course, this session will be peppered with some quotes from the world famous best-selling book by Dale Carnegie. So what is trust and influence, and how can they be used to improve the apps you build? Well, trust is all about the reliance on and confidence in the truth. It comes from credibility, honesty, integrity, which in turn comes from vulnerability and understanding. Influence is the effect of one person or thing on another, like ripples in the water. And in the context of leadership, we will talk about sources of power, which are based on trust. Apps. Well, app is short for application. An application is the act of applying to a particular use. It's also about relevance or value. And in tech, we consider an app as potentially shippable software, which makes it consumable. Let's consider what it means to be consumable. If I were in a room full of people and I drink a glass of water, and then I ask others to drink from the same glass, it's consumable, but would you want to drink it? Now, I have to thank Scott Ambler for that reference. Some quotes from Dale now. Of course, winning friends means being interested in other people, in what they do and what they want to do. But actually, building apps is no good if you don't build trust and you aren't interested in other people. So what is an app? You may have seen my article recently that states that out of the box is a myth. And what I mean by that is a combination of things. Firstly, whatever it is, whether it's a train set, a garden shed, or a ServiceNow store application, when you get it out of the box, someone still needs to put it together. So let's look at some tools and techniques that I'm going to share, some tips and tricks that you can use every day to build better apps and influence people. The 4+1 architecture model, I'll talk about how important that is to think about the mindset when you're building applications. But actually, it's about story writing and putting use cases right at the center and understanding the people that are going to use the apps. Of course, we talk a lot about story writing. We talk a lot about storytelling. But what about that bit in the middle? Listening, story hearing. And once we've heard the story, how do we take that away and think about the design How do we diverge and converge? How do we understand and make sure we're solving the right problems in the right way? And I also want to talk about customer expectations using the Kano model. So Crichton came up with the concept of the 4+1 architecture model. And this puts the use cases and the scenarios right at the center. So that's the 1 plus 4. But actually, we're typically doing a 2+1 because the physical and the development view maybe differs slightly. In the development view, aka the implementation view, this looks at the system from a programmer's perspective, and it's really concerned with software management. Typically, we're focusing on the process, we're focusing on the logic. What kind of diagrams can we borrow from Unified Modeling Language, UML? Well, there's a number here that align to each of these different views. Of course, I'm going to focus on the use case view and think about use case diagrams. But when we think about representing the logical view and the process view, I'll just highlight here class diagrams and activity diagrams. These can be really beneficial. So use cases really focus on being able to draw out who it is that's going to be using this system. And it allows us to start building that empathy. It also allows us to identify the various actors in our play so we can start playing back the stories and start bringing it to life. So when we hear about I want someone as a, we start to draw out these stick people. But it's quite often the case that if we start trying to build these diagrams into tools, we're going to be limited by the license of that application. And maybe we can't even draw a stick person. So what can we do? Well, we can look at UML and this concept of stereotyping. So if we zoom in on the chef and the use case to cook food, the two things that you see on the screen here are actually equivalent. Yeah. So the stick person as a chef is an actor. So we can use UML stereotyping to denote that this box on a diagram is actually a specific thing. We can stereotype it. And we can use these double diamond or angle brackets to actually indicate what that object is and what it represents. So our chef wants to cook food. So that's a use case. Now, typically I'll use color coding, as you can see, slightly different shades here so that it's visually appealing, much easier to read. And of course, that interaction that goes in between is just showing that these two things are talking to each other. These are lines of communication. They're not process flows. But use case diagrams will allow us to rationalize, to disambiguate the kind of actors in our play. So as we start to build out these use case diagrams, when we start writing stories, we can make sure that we're talking about the same set of actors in our play. And this can be really powerful because we want to bring things to life. We want to dramatize our ideas. So how can we bring things to life? Well, it's all about storytelling. It's all about story listening. It's all about story hearing, story writing. Of course, we know about books, but what comes out of these books? We need to start bringing things to life. We need to dramatize the ideas. We need to start putting ourselves in the shoes of the users. So you wake up Monday morning, you come back from lunch, you just had a meeting, you're about to finish work on a Friday. Let's think about listening, putting ourselves in the shoes of the audience and start hearing, building empathy. In workshops, we're expected to write the stories, but first we need to hear the stories. And the customer typically isn't going to tell us in the exact format that we like. They're going to tell us other things and we have to start listening out. So when we start to demonstrate functionality, show and tells, in sprint reviews, we do the storytelling. But we need to start with story hearing. So we need to start listening. Now, listening is a technique and you can use active listening, of course. It's a communication skill. You can get your notebook out, please. As a consultant, Make sure you're carrying your pen and your paper, scribbling down notes. It doesn't matter what it's on, but start drawing these things out, start taking notes, start making sure that you're actively listening and writing them down so you can take them back into your backlog. When the customer tells us it works in our Excel file, of course, what they mean is as a, I want, so that. But they're not going to tell us it in those words. When they tell us they need a new column, we can start to translate that into acceptance criteria. It's our job to do the listening and the converting of that requirement into a template of a story that starts to look nice and feel consistent in our backlog. It's our job to do the listening and the writing and then do the storytelling, because that is how we build empathy. So what we hear, what we write, this is the use case. Back to that use case diagram. Then we can start playing it back, dramatizing ideas of what we show and, of course, what we tell. So once we've heard those stories, we've started to understand. We want to get from A to B. And in between, there's a whole range of options. And these are the various different ways that we can start to consider the problem. And we start to break it out. We diverge. We take that A and we break it into going wide with various different options, various different perspectives, and then we bring it back together. We converge and we start to make decisions. So we can take the simple idea that came in the beginning, break it out, really complicate it, look at all the various different factors involved before we come back again to make a decision, to make it look simple. And this is great for brainstorming, for exploring and starting to think about prototypes. And so we take this design thinking from a diamond into the double diamond, where we can really go broad and make sure that the problems we solve are the right problems, and then start to make sure we're solving the problem in the right way. Once we've decided and defined which problem it is, how can we solve it? And the double diamond here is a really great tool for design thinking, for making sure, giving you confidence in your ideas, in your solutions, and ultimately in your understanding of the problem and of the people that are going to use your application. So we must be sympathetic with the other person's ideas and desires. Typically when a customer stands in front of you telling you something that they want, you might meet some resistance in that conversation. You might find some friction in the flow. It's all about understanding that the customer is doing their best to express themselves, and we need to be sympathetic to them, because what they're telling us is coming from a genuine place of noble motives. They want to do better, they want to work better, and they want the application to work for them. How can we make sure that we are understanding the problem and solving the problem in the best way? We need to start listening and playing back and understanding and asking why. Now, this can get uncomfortable for a lot of customers if we start poking and prodding. Why? It can feel confrontational sometimes. So what can we do? We have to set the customer up, let them know. We're going to be asking some difficult questions. And typically that question we're going to ask is the same question. Why? They tell us they want to do something. Why? And we keep peeling back the layers. Now, what might happen is you start to meet with this friction, this confrontation, and you need to know when to stop, when to pause, when to rest. But let the customer know this is going to be happening, and it's so that you can really focus on the understanding. The number one priority of a consultant as a developer, you really want to make sure you understand the problem. To understand the problem, you must know why. And you must take that back until you get to a point. Now, it might be 5 whys, it might be 3 whys. If you get that in the first question, that's great. You don't need to keep pushing. but make sure you've explored it. Make sure you're not treating the symptom. You're actually starting to understand and treat the problem. And this is a great technique for problem solving, for root cause analysis. And there's other techniques that can back this up. But just be prepared. The 5 whys really can be a tricky technique, but one that really does pay off and helps to build that trust and understanding. So just be aware that if you want to gather honey, you don't kick over the beehive. No one wants to get stung. It's all about customer expectations. Now, these can change over time. So the Kano model will help us understand and think about the mindset when it comes to customers' expectations. Typically, what they don't tell us is what they really want. So expectations change over time. Customers' requirements become unspoken. And there is a danger here of unspoken requirements, and the failure to deliver the unspoken requirements becomes a dissatisfier. So in the past, maybe that same thing that the customer didn't ask for, they weren't expecting, is the wow factor. And that really drives up the satisfaction and drives that excitement because the customer could never have articulated that's what they want. Now, over time, that becomes the norm, the status quo. It becomes what they expect and they stop asking for it. But then the failure to deliver it starts to become a dissatisfier. So customer requirements change over time and you need to work with them. You need to make sure you're building that trust, that understanding, and you're not failing to deliver the things that they didn't ask for. And we're not creating that friction point because it's not in the acceptance criteria. Therefore, it's not a defect, it's an enhancement. You need to go back around the cycle, and all of that can create friction and ultimately lead to unhappy customers. So we need to make sure we're working with the customer, we're understanding them, what they mean, why they're asking, and start to explore their ideas, bring them to life, and don't forget that they really do mean well. So a little recap here in terms of bringing things to life and then when to use each of these methods. Storytelling, making sure we're practicing every day. Of course, there's regular cadence that we can plug into. There's formal events that we can make sure we're using these techniques in. And then there's ad hoc situations as well. So in the regular cadence, our agile ceremonies, we've got an opportunity in sprint review and show and tells to start playing back, dramatizing those ideas and using those use case diagrams to keep our mind focused on who this is for and what they need, and make sure that the stories that are written in refinement and estimated are all part of a common understanding. Of course, when it comes to development, we take the use case using the 4+1, and that informs the logic, that informs the process, and that process is what we walk through when we're telling the story. So all of these things come back together. Meanwhile, we keep in mind the fact that expectations change over time, and we need to make sure we understand the customer. How can we understand them? Maybe using the double diamond technique to make sure we've explored all of the ideas. More formal settings in the workshops, we can start drawing things out. We can start using the whiteboards. We can focus on those use cases, understanding, rationalizing who are the actors in our play, ready to start playing that back in our documentation. We can actually start storing the use case diagrams, the process. And of course, when it comes to training material, we know who this is for because our use case sits right at the center of everything we do. And of course, there's ad hoc situations. We can actually bring things to life when we're on a little coffee break. We can check in with the customer. When you're going on a lunch break, or maybe on a holiday, what do you do just before you log off? What do you do when you first log on? We can take these ad hoc situations. We can grab the opportunity maybe in the lift, in the elevator as well. And of course, when we're doing presentations, we can bring things to life there as well. So how do we build trust? Of course, it's built on understanding. As consultants, we're walking into the customer's house and no one wants to show their mess. Okay, people are quite protective. When you've got your best friend over, it's a bit different to a guest for the first time. So Think about the way that people communicate differently once the trust is built, and how can we build that and share that understanding. Of course, icebreakers are a great technique in workshops. Now, it's not always the same icebreaker. You've got a different audience, a different workshop, maybe a different purpose, but you can always use an icebreaker. There's different types of icebreakers that you can use for different scenarios. So I would suggest you practice them, you try them out, you work with, and it depends as well on the length of time that you've got for your workshop. Introductions are very important, and this helps to establish credibility, but it's also about listening to how the other people introduce themselves. If they give a clue away, how long they've been working here, maybe their background, you can actually use that to tune in and take that to the coffee break situation as well. Maybe you're just standing at the coffee machine, somebody mentioned something in their introduction. You can use that to establish a relationship with the individual. You can also use the introduction to establish credibility. What's in it for me? Why should the audience be listening to you? Well, you've had that opportunity in your introduction to establish credibility. But don't forget as well, humility. Be vulnerable. Let other people know that you're human too. All of these techniques help to establish and build trust. Influence is a bit trickier, and there's 5 sources of power. The things I want to talk about here are the 3 weak and the 2 strong. So the 3 weak are authority, incentive and punishment. Now, if we take this into the sort of team leader management situation, but it could also be within a project as well, where there's a hierarchy. Somebody has authority, that's a weak source of power. It's not to say it doesn't exist, it's not to say you shouldn't use it, but if you rely on these weak sources, they can be taken away and they can start to crack. So if you start to reward people with incentives just to get something done, next time they maybe want double the reward, or they won't do anything unless they get that reward. It starts to become more tricky. And if you start to punish people or threaten them, coerce them into doing what you ask because you've got authority, these 3 sources of power can actually start to play against you. So don't rely on them. It's not to say they don't exist and you shouldn't ever use them, but don't rely on them if you want to build influence. You should really focus on the 2 strong sources of power, because nobody can take these away from you. Now, these are expertise and referent power. Now, expertise is really easy to think about. It could be your certifications, it could be your knowledge on a subject, making sure you're well versed on the subject matter, you're a domain expert, SME within a certain space, making sure the answers you give are accurate. If you don't know the answer, then just let the person know you will come back to them, and you do come back to them, and the answer that you give can be trusted. That will build your expertise. You will become a source of knowledge, and people will trust you, and therefore you will be able to influence them. If you want to make a design decision based on a certain point of topic, maybe a point of contention, if you've got an expert opinion there, people maybe will listen to you because you are an expert in that space. Referent power is a bit harder, and this is something we can all work on. This is all about making sure people want to follow you because it's you. So what can you do to establish this referent power? You need to be careful that it's not a cynical perspective. You're not trying to gain influence over individuals for your own benefit, but because it's the right thing to do. People will follow you because it's you, because you've built this understanding, this trust, this credibility, and because you have the expertise. People will come to you and think, I must do this because you've asked, not because you've got authority, not because they've rewarded you, not because you'll punish them if you don't, just because it's you. So referent power is really powerful, it's really strong, and you know the people that just have it. They just you just want to help them because it's them. How do you put your finger on this definition? It's really tricky, but these are 2 strong sources of power that you should really focus on using, and these can really help in a project in terms of building applications for the right people, making the right design decisions. And the only way to influence people is to talk about what they want and show them how to get it. You can't force people to follow you. When it comes to arguments, the only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it entirely. Because if you argue and rankle and contradict, you can fight. You can come up against these confrontations and you can win the argument, but it will be an empty victory. Because really more important than anything is the goodwill. And maybe it's a defect, maybe it's an enhancement, maybe it's a misinterpretation of the acceptance criteria. But if you start arguing over it, if you find yourself in a situation where you're arguing, step back from it and don't get involved in the actual argument. Be sympathetic to the person's ideas and their perspective, and actually start to think about why they're challenging it, what they need, and think about goodwill. It's going to be much more important. This is a really powerful quote from Dale here, because this talks to the Socratic method, okay? The most longest serving philosopher of our longest serving, oldest philosopher that you could know. 2,500 years, Socrates told us about this technique. So the Socratic method. Our bodies will resist change, and there will be a physiological response when we say no. If the person you're talking to starts with no, their body is already locked up and they've already started to resist. So what we can actually do is appeal to their nobler motives. Think about how you position yourself and your ideas. And when people start with yes, they loosen up, they become receptive. So you can ask your questions differently. You can position your ideas in a way that is going to elude a much better response from your audience. Instead of saying, is your current system working well for you? When you already expect the answer to that to be no, don't ask the question. Instead, try asking, do you think your current system could be improved? And of course the answer is yes. So people will start saying yes and they're opening up. Then follow with another easy one. Do you want it to be improved? Yes, of course. There's not a person in your audience that doesn't want their world to work better. So appeal to their nobler motives. And again, back to that kind of argument situation. Even if you've ended up in a situation where the other person doesn't agree with you and you're trying to convince them to your way of thinking, have you ever been in a situation where they've come back around later and said, I've got an idea, and actually it's your idea? Maybe it's been rehashed slightly. That's fine. Drop your ego. This is a great one because it's so often the case that you try to force your ideas on people and the curse of knowledge can get in the way. But when you need to use force, that will only create resistance. So I know that feeling when the idea comes back as your own, as their own, and that's okay. That's fine. Let the other person feel that the idea is theirs. Get over it. It's fine. Move forward. Focus on the bigger picture. Let the other person save face. The only points you should be scoring are Fibonacci and driving velocity. Even if you're right, let the customer take the win. You know, and they know, and you know that they know. So let them save face. If you had a brilliant idea and they didn't like it last week, now they come back and present it as if it is their idea. Let's focus on the idea. If it's a good idea, run with it. Drop the ego. Put yourself in the shoes of the customer. Try and understand their worldview. There's another technique I haven't focused on today, and it's called Cat Woe. And the W in that is actually German, Weltanschauung, worldview. It's all about understanding the customer's perspective and start to honestly see things from their point of view and appeal to their nobler motives. Try not to allow yourself to get frustrated. Believe that they want the best outcomes. Believe that they mean well. And appeal to their nobler motives. And of course, when dealing with people, remember, we are not dealing with creatures of logic. We are dealing with creatures of emotion. And don't forget you're human. Remember that the joy we feel when we're able to choose how we interact with our world. And the world's greatest ever philosopher, Socrates, teachings about human relations, and they're still relevant 2,500 years later. Dale's book has been a bestseller with over 16 million copies sold. And now we are in the world of AI, where ServiceNow and our community is helping to put AI to work for people. To build better apps, we need to build empathy first. Thank you.